Hello, everyone. Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the webinar, and thank you for sparing your valuable time to spend with us. And we hope the time you spend with us will be useful to you. And well, I'm Dr. Biss calling you or speaking to you from Houston. We had a combination of Middle East weather. Daytime, the temperature crossed 102 Fahrenheit, and now it is raining. So combination of Singapore weather and Middle East weather. And very happy to have you with us. And a team of staff from Houston had visited Singapore. When they returned, I asked them, what is the most common or the most spoken about topic? So they said, looks like Singapore is very keen on biofuels, biodiesels, and also methanol, while other alternate fuels are being considered. But for the short term, these fuels seem to be the ones in which there's a lot of industry in. So we decided to quickly assemble this seminar, and so that present to you and share with you what we know on those two topics, methanol and biodiesels and biofuels. Now, with regard to the speakers, Dr. Khurshid Alam, you all know very well. He's in the marine industry in Singapore with a double PhD. He's closely associated with MPA and other agencies, and in the research for alternate fuels. And he will speak first about methanol as a fuel. Then he'll be followed by Dr. Sarah Razai, who is from Houston. She's from Rice University. And she's going to talk about biofuels and biodiesels, where we have done some very interesting research work. So I'm sure you enjoy presentation to them. And I'm planning to be in Singapore early next month. And I'm looking forward to meeting many of you here when I'm there in Singapore. Thank you. I now request Dr. Khurshid Alam to take the stage and address you. Over.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Vish, for the introduction. Today's topic is really the burning topics today. So I will go over the alternate fuel, the choices you have for the future, and then followed by, I'll emphasize on methanol, as Dr. Vish mentioned, as fuel. And then Dr. Sarah will cover biodiesel after that. So first of all, with regard to the choices we have, the alternative fuel of the future, we have to look at the primary source where they are coming from. Because at the end of the day, that's what really counts, which I'll touch on in subsequent slide, that the life cycle of the carbon footprint. So primary source is very, very important, where the fuel is coming from. So the primary sources we have, as you know, oil, natural gas, biomass, solar, wind, hydroelectricity, and all this, and ocean energy, coal, and nuclear. Then all these primary sources are processed and then become the energy carrier, and which we really use, like fuel oil, diesel oil, hydrogen, methane, and methanol, ethanol goes on. Then the energy conversion takes place in the engines, and then we get the energy out of it and the ship moves, right? So next is to see how the propulsion power looks like in future. We started with sails, looks like we'll end up with sails again. But these sails are different from olden days sails. It will be highly computerized and to harness the best of the wind force. Then the transformation was towards coal. We all are familiar with heavy fuel oil and diesel oil we are using till today, including distillate. They will continue up to 2050, one way or other. It will be in mixed form or whatever it is. LNG came in the picture, and it will continue beyond 2050. But at the end, which fuel really will win possibly is the liquid and gas fuels from hydrogen and CO2. And then you may ask about ammonia and all this thing. Ammonia could be the carrier of the hydrogen. So ultimately, we are looking at hydrogen as the fuel and CO2. Why this combination? Because at the end, if you produce even methanol, it will be captured CO2. Again, you combine with hydrogen, make it methanol. So at the end of the day, it looks like it will be the case, right? There are hydrogen and CO2 at the end. So you are killing two birds with one stone. To capture CO2, use hydrogen, produce methanol. That may be a good solution. Okay, next, please. So as I mentioned at the beginning, that the primary source of fuel is very important, because you can't simply say that I use hydrogen in the ship and it's very clean. It doesn't have any C, no carbon, no CO2, no greenhouse gas. But then hydrogen, to process hydrogen, you need a lot of energy. It's very energy intensive. You can see the bar here. That means it is showing is well to tank. That means when it comes to the ship after being processed. And that itself is huge. And it is, then it's not angel anymore compared to today's heavy fuel oil, right? So this is one thing we have to keep in mind with regard to the life cycle of that carbon you are using, right? Right from the well, and then when it ends up in the propeller after the energy is converted. So this graph shows you that heavy fuel oil, how much is from a well to tank and tank to propeller. Same goes for methanol, same goes for, like biodiesel is another one. It's basically is well to tank. The processing itself, it has its own carbon footprint. Next, please. Another thing, you have any fuel to be introduced in the marine, many things need to be considered, like availability, infrastructure. And the first thing come in mind, how about the storage? Because it is very limited, right? So when you talked about LNG in the past, is the same thing. You need for the same round the world voyage, if you had say 10 tanks to keep the same amount of energy, you need 20 tanks like size of LNG. So as you can see from here, that benchmark is say low sulfur fuel oil. If it is one, and LNG would need around 2 times of that storage capacity. And LPG is almost the same. Methanol is 2.5. Ammonia is 4 times. Hydrogen is 6 to 10 times. And hydrogen is a thing again, how it will be carried, whether it will be carried in a gas form or in the liquid form. Most likely it will be in the gas form, like compressed hydrogen for the intra sort of trading. That means you can bunker very frequent and it can be compressed to 700 bar. But for ocean going vessel, most likely in the liquid form, right? So what is suggesting here is that in case you are going for alternate fuel, the storage thing you have to keep in mind that what sort of tank capacity you will have. It simply means you may have to go for frequent bunkering instead of increasing the number of tanks in the ship. So you keep the number almost the same, but in that case, you have to bunker quite frequently. And when you bunker frequently, that the price discrimination also comes in between port to port. So this is to do with like the endurance of it, we call the endurance, right? So how long it takes, right? So then maybe half the voyage you have to top up again a place where the price may be higher or lower. So all this you have to put in the equation. Next, please. With regard to the efficiency of the engines, as you can see from the graph here, that as I have shown at the beginning, maybe the fuel cell is going to win at the end. And fuel cell, where the hydrogen is the primary source of where you get the fuel cell. But the efficiency of the fuel cell is much higher compared to today's the ship engine. You have the diesel engines. You can see here it around 70% efficiency, right? So this is what we are looking at, higher efficiency than the diesel engines. Next, please. So what is the best fuel option? Then as we see in today's world, 2022, how does it look like? As I say, to have this fuel introduced in marine, you have to look at availability, you have to look at the infrastructure, how mature is the technology, and the energy density. That's to do the storage, right? Or how much storage space you need, and the price and green credentials, right? So as you can see, 2022, a lot of red boxes are there. That means they are not ready to go, right? Unless you satisfy most of it, most likely they will not have a place in marine, right? But as we move forward, 2035, 2030 is one of the milestone of marine and other rules. So as we cross 2030, so in 2035, as you can see, many of them many of the reds turn to green, and the yellow boxes also getting lesser, right? So I'm not going in detail, but you can have a feel of it, that how does it look like, like methanol, maybe so already methanol is there, more or less 2022, and 2035 it will still be there, right? The green and all. But some of the things like methanol, the energy density and all this thing, is the default thing, right? You have to live with it. So, okay, next, please. So if you put in a schematic diagram, it looks like this, right? So we said ultimately everyone is looking at what is the primary source, not just saying that I burn hydrogen or I burn ammonia and all this. You have to look at the primary source where it's coming from. So primary source has to be renewable, and take note of it. Nuclear is coming back. It looks like a lot of movement going on with regard to nuclear, with all its associated risk in it, but yet it is a cleaner fuel in a way, right? So this renewable source will produce electricity. At the end of the day, the electricity that counts, that means to say to break even, say, water by electrolysis, the hydrogen and oxygen, we need electricity. So everywhere we need electricity, right? So, and then all this reformation of, like, even you produce ammonia, nitrogen and hydrogen, Haber-Bosch process, all this is like, again, you need high pressure, high temperature, all boil down to, again, electricity, right? Okay, so electricity from the renewable source, we have this electricity generated, and then we can have, in a simple form, electrolysis, break the water to hydrogen and oxygen. And then we can manipulate it. With hydrogen, we can produce hydrogen alone by itself, or hydrogen by synthesis with the CO2. As I mentioned, it can produce methanol, and then you are killing two birds with one stone. You capture the CO2 from the ship's uptake, and then produce methanol by yourself. So like this, e-diesel, e-LNG, e-kerosene, all will come. And same hydrogen, when you synthesize with nitrogen, as I mentioned, like a Haber-Bosch process, then it produces ammonia. So everything boils down to, again, the primary source, because this is what it really counts, right? Okay, thank you. Next. But at the end, again, another thing most likely will come in is that it will be mixed technology for power supply. Here, this schematic is showing you that, again, you see that the solar panel giving you solar energy, though it will be very limited for the ship, the surface area you have very limited, yes. But at the end, the solar energy goes to the battery, through the battery goes to the power management system. And this is the central system which will supply the electricity to the motor and will turn the propeller, right? So from solar, is the primary source is very green. Wind sail, as I mentioned, it will again feed into that power management system. And then below you see that again, be it LNG, be it ammonia, that we put in there, and from there by some reformation, you make say you get hydrogen out of it, and then that means it goes to the fuel cell, right? And again, that reformation process, of course, you will again energy intensive. But when it goes to the fuel cell, an interesting thing is that you have low temperature fuel cell, you have high temperature fuel cell, but high temperature fuel cell ultimately will win. And then when it's a high temperature fuel cell, it has some even byproduct, like say the heat is generated out of it. Instead of wasting it away, you recover that heat, wasted recovery, right? And then again feed to the power management. Again, from fuel cell to the power management. At the end, you turn the propeller to the motor. So what it means, it will be a combination of all this. So what you will see in future as the days go by, this power management will be a combo, so will be the fuel. And you will see in the subsequent slide when I cover, and Sarah will be covering, that we are not straight away jumping to, say, another alternative fuel straight away. Many of them will be mixed, will be again with other fuel and all, right? So it's a mixed one. Okay, next, please. Before I move on to methanol, just to let you know that Viswa is very proud to have the R&D. Not many labs in the world do those kind of R&D, what we do. And then we are always at the forefront of all those development taking place. And we were the member of the technical committee for coming up with this TR56 for LNG bunkering. Next, yeah. We, again, for GCMD, Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization, they had the press release on 26th of July. And as you can see, Viswa is a partner of that. And here, a lot of all the green fuels will be tested, and many of them is not the usual test. It will be sort of innovative tests and all. At the end, we are partner for that and supporting this project. Okay, next. We have done 2 years biofuel field test with MASD, that is NTU offshoot there, and it was tried out on ferry, the biofuel project. It was a 2 years project. In September, the report is supposed to come out. Next. Another one is that ammonia is again is a sort of becoming, and Singapore is supporting this ammonia venture quite a bit. And now for, again, it's a GCMD project for ammonia storage, bunkering, and infrastructure by and led by DNV Surbana. And again, Viswa is a partner in this project. Next. So let's talk about methanol, a very few words on that. So methanol as marine fuel, as we have put on the table, you can see against the low sulfur fuel oil and heavy fuel oil and diesel oil. A few things to note here, like is, for example, its flash point is very, very low, 11 to 12 degrees Celsius. compared to the, that heavy fuel oil and VLSFO. As you know, the regulation doesn't allow any flash point less than 60 to be stored in the engine room, right? So this is one thing. And second thing, also auto ignition temperature also pretty high. It's 464 compared to the heavy fuel oil around 320 or 350, right? So this is one thing to note. And another thing is that the energy content of methanol is also on the low side. So what it really means at the end, the bone of contention is that methanol has a lower flash point is one thing to note. Another one is lower energy content. It simply means you need more space to store, right? Next. So here you can see what modification would be required. This is one thing. Methanol is among all the alternative fuels. Methanol, I think, is more friendly with regard to modification required. That means for retrofitting the ship for carrying methanol, because its storage temperature is is not like LNG and all. That is very normal temperature. You can store it, and the pressure is like an atmospheric pressure kind of thing. So it is simple to convert that existing even tanks to methanol to carry methanol. But again, it will be outside, of course, all the bunker tank, and you don't need any and the tank storage tank, or rather the service tank, it itself will be somewhere on deck, and from there it's a double wall pipe. It goes to penetrate to the engine room and goes to the engine, and you don't need any purifier for that. No need purification. This is another good thing about methanol. So, and then whether it affects some, the seals and all these things, some of the seals, they are sensitive, and this is doable. It's not a big deal, and no heating is required. Rather, maybe you need to do some kind of cooling and all. So I think methanol in that sense is very friendly to convert. LNG retrofitting did not pick up because of this huge undertaking. You need to have a separate tank itself, and the weight of the tank is so huge, it actually takes some of the draft of the ship. Next, please. So pro and con, I think I have to be careful about the time. I think already is 20 minutes. So methanol pros and cons using methanol as marine fuel. And it has a low emission, and then it is biodegradable. In case it is spilled, it mixes with the water. It's the alcohol, right? It's not a problem. And economical, it is comparable with the gas oil price, and a low cost for the vessel conversion. As I mentioned, that it hardly need any little modification, and then infrastructure is already there, more or less. And some drawback of the methanol is a bit corrosive because it's the weak acid and all. It may affect some metals and all, but it is dangerous in a way because if you inhale, and toxic, right? And low flash point, I already touched on that. And then your low energy content, that is the space you need is more, right? And then in the lubrication, maybe you need different kind of lubrication for that. Next, please. So these are some of the methanol powered vessel in operation and future, right? So as you see that any fuel comes in as a new in the marine, they always try to use it for the carrier itself. Like LNG had the same thing. LNG was used as the fuel for the engine for the LNG carrier. So same like methanol, also methanol carriers are the first one to try out methanol, right? So that's the way it will go. Right? Next, please. So now talk about methanol. Again, as I said, it will be just like the power, you saw the combo, and here also you will have a lot of variety. So just to give you a glimpse of it, it will come as methanol will come as brown, gray, blue, green methanol, right? So again, it is coming from the renewable source or non-renewable, and then a mix and match and all this thing at the end. Some will be green methanol, some will be gray and all these things. So this is the way forward. Next, please. So Viswa has done some research on methanol. So we started with, right, like, because the issues we have with methanol is that the phase separation due to a hydrophilic character of alcohol, and then methanol is immiscible with the VLSFO. Another one, the flash point, as I have mentioned, like 11 to 12 degrees Celsius. So what we have tried, the solution wise, we have tried using blending agents such as water, dodecanol and isopropanol and biodiesel and all this thing, and additive. Also, we try to increase the flash point and blending with high flash point vegetable oil, which will show it next slide. Yeah, as you can see here, the methanol, even say the methanol and the water and biodiesel and all, and we have done the blending, and with again, other one is the vegetable oil. So you can see that the maximum amount of methanol that can be blended with VLSF is only 0.1%. Because if you go more than that, again, you fail in the flash point, right? The flash point, as you can see, 1.1%, it gives you a flash point 71. So if you go for 0.15 or anything, that means it will be lower than 60, right? So that is the maximum you can, right? But when you do a blending with the vegetable oil, because vegetable oil, the flash point is very, very high compared to even the VLSFO, right? VLSFO is 90 or like, and here is 350. So you can mix up to 5% the methanol with the vegetable oil. Okay, next, please. So methanol, when you do the lab testing, you can say that what method do you follow, the ASTM E34608, and another one is the INCA one. But both of them is more for, basically it is for the chemical property of the methanol, not so much about the performance, how it's going to behave inside the engine. Yeah. So next. Yeah. So, but with regard to the performance, Viswa has come up with some test method will be applicable for your performance in the engine. And these are the one like acidity, the water miscibility, iron, and all those things. And these are the tests we do. And it is again based on that E34608 and INCA. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think mine is done, right? I think let Dr. Saha take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alam. Hi, everyone. In this part of presentation, I want to talk about the biofuel and applicability of the biofuel in marine industry. So in this part of presentation, I'm talking about the biofuel and applicability of the biofuel in marine industry. In the first couple of slides, I'm going to talk about the definition of biofuel and then characteristic of biofuel, pros and cons, and the operational issue that can happen with the biofuel sample. Then I'm going to talk about the biodiesel and VLSFO samples that we have used for our study, followed by the result and discussion and summary of our findings. So based on the IMO regulation, by the year of 2030, there should be 40% reduction in carbon intensity. And by the year of 2050, there should be 70% reduction. And the final goal is to reach to zero carbon emission. On the right side, you will see the list of future fuel that can be used for the marine application, which can be ammonia, methanol, hydrogen, LNG, and biofuel. And biofuel can be divided into biodiesel and hydrotreated vegetable oil. Based on the ISO 8217 version 2017, there was a limit for the presence of FAME in the residual fuel, which was 0.5%. And in distillate fuel, it was 7%. But in June 2022, IMO has approved the usage of B30 fuel, which means the mixture of 30% biodiesel with 70% distillate fuel, residual fuel, or VLSFO sample. During the last 2 years, some of the shipping companies have started the usage or trial of biofuel. It depends on the amount of biofuels that they were using, they will have in different amount of GHG emission reduction. For example, if they have used 100% biofuel, the GHG emission reduction was 90%. And if they have used 30% biofuel, the GHG emission reduction can be between 20 to 25%. But it's important what is the source of biofuel. This reduction that I have talked about was from the biofuels, which are coming from the waste material. Now, in terms of characteristic of the biofuel, biodiesel has lower density and viscosity in comparison to the HFO and VLSFO sample. In terms of ignition property, biodiesel has good ignition property. And in terms of carbon content of biodiesel is 77%, which is lower than the heavy fuel and VLSFO sample. As a result, heating value of the biodiesel sample is lower than the heating value of the VLSFO or HSFO sample. If you look at the advantage and disadvantages of the biofuel, biodiesel will result into the CO2 emission reduction, particulate material, and sulfur oxide emission reduction. Biodiesel can mixes very well with the petroleum diesel, and it has good lubricity properties. Biodiesel can be considered as a drop-in fuel, which means that it can be used on board the ship without any changes into the infrastructure. Now, in terms of the disadvantages of the biodiesel, it can degrade over time faster in comparison to the VLSFO. Also, it can have poor oxidation stability properties. It can have poor cold flow properties. Biodiesel is a good solvent, so it can attack the rubber and sealing material. In addition to that, biodiesel can absorb water during the storage time, so it is more prone to the microbial contamination issue. Biodiesel has lower heating value in comparison to the HFO and VLSFO sample, so the fuel oil consumption of biodiesel can be higher. And finally, operation on 100% biodiesel may result into the NOx emission increase. In terms of the operational issue, using 100% biodiesel may have poor oxidation stability properties. It may have poor cold flow properties because biodiesel can absorb water. It is more prone to the microbial contamination. And because of the amount of oxygen that biodiesel has in its structure, it can cause some corrosion issues because of high acidity. And the last issue can be incompatibility issue. Now, for the marine application, for the blend of biodiesel with distillate fuel or residual fuel oil samples, there are three important properties that we need to pay attention to. The first one is oxidation stability. Since biodiesel can have poor oxidation stability properties, it is important to monitor that the biodiesel blend can stay stable during the storage time. The second point is about acidity properties. Since biodiesel has oxygen in its structure, it can go under the oxidation reaction and it can cause some corrosion issue. So it is important to monitor the acidity of your sample during the storage and usage of the fuel. And finally, if you are using biodiesel for the blending, it is important to test the compatibility of the biodiesel with the VLSFO or HSFO sample. Now, we have used VLSFO and biodiesel from different sources in our internal study. We have used 6 different biodiesel samples from used cooking oil, palm oil, and soybean oil sources. And we have used 9 different VLSFOs from different characteristics, from paraffinic characteristic to the aromatic characteristic. And the properties of VLSFOs that we have used in this study were within the specification of ISO 8217, except for a few samples, the sediment content was out of the specification. The goal of this study is to blend the biodiesel sample with the VLSFO and evaluate the quality of the final blend. In terms of basic property, I will start with density and viscosity. When we are blending the biodiesel with the VLSFO, it will result into a reduction of density and viscosity of the VLSFO sample. When we are blending the biodiesel with VLSFO in terms of ash and water content, it is going to result into the reduction of ash value and water content value. With regards to the flash point, depends on the initial flash point value of the biodiesel and VLSFO sample. the flash point of final blend can increase or it can decrease. In terms of the sulfur content, when we are blending the biodiesel with VLSFO, since the sulfur limit for the VLSFO sample can be up to 0.5, and for the biodiesel, it can be only up to 10 ppm. Definitely, when we are blending the biodiesel with VLSFO, it will result into the sulfur content reduction. In terms of acidity, on the left side, we are showing the acidity value of 4 different VLSFO samples and the blend of this VLSFO with 30% and 50% biodiesel. The limit for the acidity of the VLSFO sample is 2.5. For the biodiesel is 0.5. So when we are blending the biodiesel with the VLSFO sample, depends on the initial acid value of the biodiesel and VLSFO, the final acid value can increase or it can decrease, which on the left side that you are seeing the result, you're seeing a trend of increasing the acidity value of the sample when you're blending them with the biodiesel. Now on the right side, you're showing the changes in acidity. Since changes in acidity can be a concern related to the usage of biodiesel blends, we have done an accelerated study. For 2 days, we have aged the sample at 100 C. Then we have measured the total acid number of the sample. We have seen that for the VLSFO sample, there is no changes in the acid number value. But for the VLSFO, which is blended with biodiesel, we are seeing that there is a slight increase in the acidity value after 2 days aging of the sample at 100 C. In addition to the acidity value, we have measured the pH value. For the pH value, we are not seeing any changes in the pH value after 2 days aging of the sample at 100 C. This result means that although some oxidative material is forming due to the oxidation reaction of biodiesel sample, but these oxidative material are not going to be highly corrosive and are not going to cause any operational issue. But since these blends are new to the market, we will recommend to monitor the changes in the acidity during the storage and usage of your fuel. Next property is about cold flow property. We have measured pour point and wax appearance temperature in order to evaluate cold flow properties of VLSFOs. On the left side, you're seeing the pour point value for 3 VLSFO samples blended with 50% biodiesel. And as you can see, after the process of blending, there is a reduction in the pour point value. On the right side, you will see the wax appearance temperature result for a VLSFO sample and the blend of VLSFO with 30%, 50%, and 70% biodiesel. And as you can see, there is a decrease in the WAT value when the amount of biodiesel is increasing in the sample. This result means that biodiesel can even improve the cold flow properties of VLSFO sample. Next part about stability property. We have measured total sediment potential in order to evaluate the stability properties of blend. On the left side, we are seeing the TSP of VLSFO sample and the blend of VLSFO with 30%, 50%, and 70% biodiesel. And as you can see, by increasing the amount of biodiesel in the sample, there will be a reduction in the total sediment potential value. And on the right side, we are seeing the result of 3 VLSFO sample after blending with 50% biodiesel, which from the data set 2, you can see that there is a reduction in the total sediment potential value. Based on this result, we can get to this conclusion that biodiesel can improve the stability properties of VLSFO sample. Next property is about long-term storage stability property. In order to evaluate long-term storage properties of VLSFO and the blend of VLSFO with biodiesel, we have used our in-house algorithm. Based on our algorithm, we are able to determine the shelf life of the sample. Based on this algorithm, we are subjecting the fuel to the thermal and mechanical stresses for 5 days, and each day we are measuring the sediment content. Based on this result for the VLSFO sample, we are seeing that there is an increase in the sediment value by increasing the aging time. The sediment value can reach to 0.7%. But for the VLSFO, which is blended with biodiesel, you are seeing that there is a significant reduction in the sediment value. And for the VLSFO, which is blended with 50% and 70% biodiesel, you are seeing that all the 5 sediment value are below 0.1, which based on our algorithm, it means that these two blends can stay stable at least up to 60 days. While the VLSFO sample by itself was unstable from day one. Based on this result, we can get to this conclusion that biodiesel can even improve the long-term storage properties of VLSFO sample. Next property is about ignition property. In order to evaluate ignition property, we have measured estimated cetane number for 2 VLSFO sample and the blend of this VLSFO with 50% and 70% biodiesel. Which based on this result, you can see that by increasing the amount of biodiesel in the sample, there is an increase in the estimated cetane number value, which we can conclude that biodiesel can improve the ignition properties of VLSFO sample. And the last property is about heating value. On the left side, you are seeing the calculated heating value based on ISO 8217 and the measured heating value based on ASTM D240. As you can see, there is a difference between the calculated and measured heating value for the 4 different biodiesel blends. On the right side, you will see the difference between the calculated and measured heating value versus the biodiesel content, which based on this result, we can get to this conclusion that by increasing the amount of biodiesel in the sample, the difference between calculated and measured heating value is increasing. Which means that for the biodiesel blend, we cannot use the calculated version of heating value, and we need to use the ASTM D240 in order to measure the actual heating value of the biodiesel blends. Just giving you a summary of our findings so far, we have used biodiesel from used cooking oil, palm oil, and soybean oil sources. We have blended the biodiesel at the ratio of 30, 50, and 70% with the VLSFO. In terms of the basic characteristic, not only biodiesel did not have any negative impact on the basic properties of VLSFO sample, but also we have seen significant improvement in ignition property, stability property, as well as long-term storage stability properties of biodiesel blends. Please note that all the biodiesel samples that we have used, their properties were within the specification of ASTM or EN method. In terms of testing, for the pure biodiesel sample, it needs to be tested as per EN or ASTM method. For the biodiesel, which is blended with the VLSFO or residual fuel, it needs to be tested as per ISO 8217. And these are the testing package that we are offering for the biodiesel, which is blended with residual fuel sample. In addition to ISO 8217, we are recommending the GCMS in order to ensure that biodiesel is not adding any chemical contaminants, polymeric contaminants, or free fatty acid to the sample. Since biodiesel can absorb water during the storage time, it is more prone to the microbial contamination. So we are recommending the microbial test. In order to evaluate the cold flow property, we are recommending WAT/WDT test. And since biodiesel can have poor oxidation stability property, we are recommending our in-house long-term stability assessment test in order to determine the shelf life of biodiesel blends. In order to evaluate the ignition property, we are recommending the estimated cetane number test by FIA. And in case if you want to calculate the carbon emission factor, we are recommending the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen analysis test. If you have an unknown blend, we are recommending the C14 test in order to determine the amount of biogenic carbon that you have in your sample. And the last point is about heating value, which needs to be tested as per ASTM D240. Since these blends are new to the market, we are recommending to monitor the changes in the sediment content, acidity value, microbial growth, and water content of the sample during the storage and usage of the fuel. And this is the testing package that we are offering for the biodiesel, which is blended with distillate fuel. It's the same testing package. The only difference is that for this one, we are not offering the long-term stability assessment because our long-term stability assessment method is only applicable for the residual base fuel sample. And for this distillate sample, we are not recommending WAT, WDT, because we can measure the cloud point and CFPP for the distillate samples. And just my last slide is about our current biofuel project that we are working on. We are still characterizing more biodiesel samples from different sources. And we are blending them with the VLSFO in order to evaluate the quality of final blends for the marine application. The second project is about using the additive in order to improve the quality of the biodiesel blends. And the last project is about using off-spec biodiesel sample for the marine application. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening to me and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. Thank you, Dr. Kalam. We have a few questions that have been asked by us the last few months. I'll just a question for Dr. Alam. Does methanol fuel help in EEXI and CII?
Yeah, it certainly does. Because EEXI is using the EEDI formula, and in that, the alternate fuel that carbon factor is affected by methanol, and same goes for CII. Yes.
Thank you. Is methanol retrofitting really a viable option?
It is, as I mentioned, among all the alternate fuels, I think methanol is the most friendly with regard to retrofitting. By virtue of its it doesn't have to be like a cryogenic, like a refrigerated and all. And in that sense, it is the retrofitting cost is pretty low, and it is a viable option. Yes. As a matter of fact, the slide I have shared, that one of the ships, they are actually doing that retrofitting. I think Waterwave or someone, yeah, or Stena, I think.
Will there be a universal engine which can burn all types of alternate fuels?
Yeah, this is very interesting. I think engine makers are working on it. So they are working from two different angles. One is that in the new build, the engine they are building in a way with some kind of kit, it can be converted from one fuel to another one. So it is one option they're working on. Another one they're working on is the existing engines, whether again with the similar concept with the kits, whether all type of fuel, alternative fuel can be used. This is in their R&D, it is already happening, yeah. With regard to the universal design of the tanks, I was talking about this, I think, a few months ago. Why not? And then there was some apprehension, but I'm glad to see that even as early as last week or the week before, I think DNV has come up with that design of the tanks, like a universal tank design. It can carry any type of alternative fuel, be it ammonia, be it LNG, something like that, or methanol. And so this is interesting. Yeah, it is the concern of the operator, because they can't really decide which one to go for and whether this is the right one they have gone for. So if this one happens, then it makes life easier. Thank you. Yeah.
And do the operators need to care about the life cycle carbon footprint?
Yeah, of course, they should, because you see the movement, what is going on, many of them actually coming from the EU directives. So what they have done for even for aviation and all, and the other, even for biofuel, they have done that. That means they would like to see the life cycle of the carbon. It's not the carbon you just burn, and then they want to really see the life cycle. And this is what is happening. Even say, talk about even emission and sustainability. Even people are talking about now even scope 3 shipping emission. That means to say what you burn is not enough. How about your subcontractors and all those people? So how are they environmental friendly? So upstream, downstream. So I think everyone is looking at the life cycle and the very holistic sort of addressing of these environmental issues. Yes. Thank you.
And if hydrogen comes as a fuel, will it be in gas form or refrigerated?
It could be in gas form and refrigerated. As I mentioned, I think for intra-trading, that means it's a short sea passage. Because hydrogen, to make it viable, it has to be pressurized, just like a CNG, compressed natural gas. But in hydrogen, it has to be around 600 to 700 bar pressure. So, and then, of course, you can't keep that much of pressurized sort of hydrogen. The storage is a problem. So for the feeder ships, like, or for the intra-trading, it is a viable option. So they can bunker more frequently. But for the long haul vessel, it is a different story. I think it has to be in refrigerated form, one way or other. Thank you.
Dr. Sarah, why would anyone want to use biodiesel blended with VLSFOs?
Actually, because of three reasons. The first one is that biodiesel mixes very well with the residual fuel or VLSFO sample. The second one is that biodiesel will result into the GHG emission reduction. And the third one is that biodiesel is considered as a drop-in fuel, which means it can be used on board the ship without any changes into the infrastructure.
And is NOx emission a problem related to the usage of biofuel?
If the biofuel content is less than 30%, NOx emission is not going to be a problem. But if the fuel has more than 30% biofuel sample, it needs to be verified that the engine is not altered beyond the approved parts and settings of NOx technical file in order not to require NOx testing.
And is there any guidelines for blending the biodiesel with VLSFOs?
At this time, there is no specific guideline for the blending purposes. The only thing that we are recommending before the process of blending, they need to ensure that the biodiesel is compatible with the VLSFO or HSFO sample. Also, they need to make sure that the biodiesel blends can stay stable at least during the storage and usage of the fuel.
And is there any special preparation for the tanks required regarding usage of biodiesel blend?
Apart from the proper cleaning of the tank, there is nothing required.
And are biodiesel and vegetable oils the same?
They are not the same. Actually, biodiesel is a product of the chemical process of transesterification of vegetable oil. And if we use vegetable oil directly, it will result into the deposit and soot formation, which is going to cause the sludging issue.
Good. We have a few other questions. We are coming to the end of our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have. If you'll send us an email or call us, we'll be happy to answer your questions. And if you'd like a copy of this presentation, please drop us a message and we'll be happy to share it. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Dr. Kalam. Thank you, Dr. Sarah.
Any polling result?
Yes, we'd had 3 questions in the polls, and the results were as follows. For the question of what is your preference in marine fuels, the current VLSFOs, biofuels, and methanols? This is a multiple choice questions. 50% of the audience said current VLSFO is the preference. 48% said biofuels, and 19% said methanol. For the question on have you used biofuels or biofuel blends? 25% said they have used biofuel or biofuel blends. 75% of the audience said they have not used biofuel blends. And for the final question about if the people who use biofuel blends, if they had any issues, 64% said they had no issues at all when using biofuels or biofuel blends. 36% said they had some issues, and 0% said they had many issues. These were the 3 poll results.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.